everyone. Welcome back to Personalization Outbreak Podcast, your go-to podcast for meaningful conversations with influential leaders from different sectors every week. Now, our guest today comes from the education sector. Andy Sulick is the president of Santa Margarita Catholic High School. With a master's degree in Catholic Education Administration and a bachelor's degree in Education and History, Andy established an innovative program that provides students with real-world networking and growth opportunities. Now, together, we'll talk about how to operationalize personalization by adapting traditional leadership models to serve the unique needs of students. Now, we'll also discuss why institutions should start prioritizing well-being in the digital era and discuss how educators can help students face the growing mental health issues related with the advancement of technology. So before we get started, click the like button below, share it with your colleagues, and subscribe to our YouTube channel and social media at Glenn Yopes so that you can stay in touch with our most recent content about leadership in the age of personalization. Let's get started. You are listening to Personalization Outbreak, a podcast about the collapse of traditional corporate standards in today's more personalized world. I'm Glenn Yopes. I'm a leadership strategist, author, contributor to Forbes, and founder of the Leadership in the Age of Personalization movement. On this show, I'm interviewing executives across multiple sectors to find out how the balance between standardization and personalization can exist. Andy, it's great to have you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, Andy. I mean, look, why would we not have you? I mean, you bring such wisdom and care to your field of education, and clearly, what's gone on in high schools throughout the United States over the past 18 months has been alarming. And so we're really excited to hear your points of view on where high school students are right now and how educational leaders should be preparing for it, but also your perspective on what you see long term. So on that note, let's get started. Why do you believe that personalization happens when we discover, when we nurture, when we develop, and we validate the significance that every human being can contribute? What are your thoughts, Andy?
I think when we talk about our kids, one of the unique perspectives that I have at Santa Margarita is I was a student here, I was a teacher here, I was a coach here, and I've now been an administrator here. And so I can rely on the experiences that I had in the different arenas. And I call on them at times too. I'm like, hey, how would the kids feel about this? Or when I was at faculty meetings, sitting in faculty meetings, what was a good way that administrators got my attention? Or now sitting in this position here is what is something that we can do that's significant, that's transformational to our faculty and staff that isn't just resulting around pay, because obviously that's always a concern. But what is a way that we can make them feel significant? And so I rely on that experience in all aspects of when I make decisions. And then, I do these lunches on a monthly basis with kids, actually pre-COVID and now coming out of COVID, we'll do them again, where I get my assistant, I said, get 10 kids. Let's have them in for lunch. And I'm going to ask them, what do you think of the place? We're here for you. What do you like? What don't you like? And then the teachers that they like, I write the notes down, and then I'll put a letter in that teacher's mailbox and say, just so you know, you're significant. You've made a transformational difference in a student's life that I just randomly had lunch with the other day. And so we tried it, but I rely on that experience as a leader. And also, I think it helps me and all of the things that you and Dr. Lacey and many of the people on our consortium are doing with personalization, because that experience helps me make decisions.
So Andy, as I listen to you, I go back to what we've all said that we've been in education, which is student-centered. But it seems to me that this has been something that you've been practicing a while. What has the student taught you about leadership?
Well, the number one thing is when I was a student, and even when you guys were students many years ago, the game has changed. Just a simple example is lockers on campus. You don't really need them anymore. because everything, we have tablets. So our kids are on tablets all day, and then they have these ebooks. So the lockers that we once had at one point, we don't necessarily need. So when I sit down with kids, I also understand that education has changed. Information is more at their hands. We used to look at encyclopedias. We used to have to go to the library and we would have to research things in the library. Now you can Google it. You can get all these peer-reviewed articles and different things like that. So it's changed. And some of that change obviously is for the better, but then some of that change has forced us as educators to be more accountable. It helps in like last year with Zoom calls on COVID. We knew that parents could hear what our teachers were teaching in the classroom. Mm-hmm. And in a lot of times we got really positive feedback from how our teachers were teaching in the classroom or in their Zoom calls. But we also got some feedback that was also helpful to us in, again, maintaining decisions and making decisions that are in the best interest of the kids entrusted to us.
So, okay, you mentioned accountability. Give me another leadership attribute that you believe you've evolved in as a result of what you've learned from the unique needs of your students.
Well, I think it's interesting you say that because when I was in sales many years ago, they talk about objections are needs stated negatively. And so when I get an email from a parent or a student and they tell me what's going on in a particular classroom, I'm like, okay, well, we're clearly not meeting the need that this family particularly has. So the good news is, and I learned this from my friend who has a very successful restaurant in town. And when he first opened the restaurant, he talked about how he wasn't getting very many customers and things were really struggling for the first 6 months. And then all of a sudden he started calling people and saying, why aren't you coming back? What do you want to see here? Well, your wine list isn't this or whatever. So what we do is I try and embrace the failure. What I mean by that is if we embrace the things we're not doing well, that gives us an opportunity to then meet the needs and then you have less objections. And I think that it's a hard thing to do. And, one of my favorite books is I'm a big Ryan Holiday fan. He wrote a book called Ego is the Enemy, and he talks about stillness is the key and different things like that. But at the end of the day, all we're trying to do is do things that are in the best interest of our kids. But it's through these objections and embracing the failures that we actually get opportunities. The challenges is to get better.
Well, this sounds in perfect alignment to what you stand for, Andy, because you believe that delivering solutions for good that enhance, make better, help, and provide clarity is important. Why do you feel that way?
Well, education continues to change. Solutions and compromise on both sides help grow the institution for the better. And so our leadership team, and we get together with our leadership team, with our assistant principals and our vice presidents, our principal, I invite them to give their perspectives. We don't always have to agree. And actually, it's through those disagreements that we actually end up becoming out stronger in the end. And as a result of that, the solution is student-centric. And then it enhances our institution because the only thing that's constant is change. We don't educate the same way we did in 1987 when we first opened here. And in 2021, coming out of COVID, we're going to continue to change and evolve, in some respects, even faster now because we adapted as many high schools and many colleges in the country did. Within a 3-week time period, we went from learning in classrooms, brick and mortar, to completely online learning that we thought was going to be for 5 weeks. And it ended up being for the entire second semester. So COVID taught us that we could adapt and swiftly and decisively when needed. And so then the solutions that our leadership team and our ed tech team came up with benefited ultimately our students in a very volatile time in education from February to June of 2020.
So Andy, you know that I'm a big believer that inclusion is a growth strategy, and we're going to talk about DE&I in a little bit. But now, as you go through this level of change in the institution, and you know how high school students are changing because of social media and other stressors in their life. How do you rely on your alumni community to help you in your leadership team get out in front of change? I've got to believe that given the prestige of Santa Margarita High School, that you've got quite an alumni network that may have a point of view.
Yeah, for sure. We just crossed over 11,000 alumni with this graduating class of 2021.
Wow.
And you know what makes our school special, and again, I'm not saying this negatively about any other school, but our alumni feel a deep connection to the place. They believe in the teachers that taught them, the coaches that were working with them, the friendships that they've made. Many of them, I always tell kids that we hope that you make friendships that last a lifetime. And, you see that when you go to weddings and you've got kids that graduated from high school together and they're in each other's wedding, and that's really a powerful transformation as well. But all that, I think what's helped me candidly is the alumni, because I can call on them. They're all over the world. They're all different sectors, whether it's healthcare, professional business, education. And we bring them in and look, you sat in these classrooms, you swam in this pool, you ran on this field, you performed on that stage, and what do you remember? What do you think were the best things about Santa Margarita? And then also, how did you take those experiences and move them into your careers? And so it's really relevant for our kids because they see these alum come back, and then they're like, oh yeah, well, I can do what that guy did. And so they're very inspiring, but they also help me from an expertise point of view, because I call on them because some of them are running companies now, running schools, and we collaborate on quite a few things when we start making really informed decisions. And we're, hey, what are you doing over there? And how our culture is here. What are you doing over there? And that has really benefited us.
So given the experience that you've had with your alumni community, what wisdom can you share around how to build community as we get out of COVID? And then I'm going to ask Scott to jump in with his perspective.
Coming out of COVID, I think one of the things that we've learned a couple things. It gave us the gift of time, time to reflect, time to think, pause. You had more family time. There was very little activity in some respects, which was actually good because I think many of us, and us included, and our kids are over-programmed. And it gave us time to do really two things: either recommit to the profession that you're in, whatever it happens to be, and recommit to your family. But at the same time, it gave families, and several of our employees, I'll give an example, are moving out of state. So we have families that kids went to school here, and they're moving to a different state. And in some cases, it gave some of our employees here also the chance to look at a new career. And so I think we're trying as an institution to, first of all, we don't know where the new normal is, or we're not going back, but what's the new normal yet? We're still getting a lot of questions about masks, no masks. What are you doing in the classroom? What are you teaching? When we get into some of the DEI stuff that we'll talk about here in a second, what are you doing on that front? But I think ultimately what helped us, was we got the gift of time to help us recommit to what's important. And, I appreciate, I think a lot of our families now look back and they're like, man, that was a really special time in our lives that we were able to do that, because that had never happened before, where we were literally shut down.
So Scott, where are we right now in the conversation? What are you thinking?
Couple things, I guess. Well, I'll go with this one, and it kind of goes back to, I think we're still in the same spot, but back to the objection equals needs expressed negatively, right? And how that, Andy, how you related that back to kind of one of your leadership approaches, right? Or your sort of the way that you roll. And that's this whole idea of essentially facilitating solutions through compromise, right? And one thing that I think that at least I'd like to think about more for myself, if not maybe put it on the table for others to offer their 2 cents, Glenn and Andy both, right? That I think that as we think about this idea about solutions through compromise, Glenn always, right? I always do this, Glenn. I always start to go back to, it's like, be careful. We're going to go back and do the same thing over again, but we're not going to know it. We're just going to call it something different, right? Yeah. So my only concern is actually another way that's also an escape. And that is when we start thinking about the objection and we start thinking about compromise-based solutions, one track that I think we're going to go back to more often than not, if we're not in check, is maintaining the dyadic principles, dialectic approaches, where it's this or it's that. It was the admin, here's the admin's point of view, the faculty objected, so now it's a this one versus that one. And what I want to go back to is your original point, Andy, when you were talking about the need to essentially bring everybody into conversations, right? And to have everybody part of conversations. So it's what I have the community, the faculty, you mentioned students, you mentioned alumni, and most importantly, you're also mentioning staff, which oftentimes get completely put off the page with these discussions, right? Here's the deal. I'm thinking that if we keep reaching for this compromise-based solutions, we run the risk of shooting ourselves in the foot, because I think ultimately we're going to go back to that dyadic principle where we're going to say, oh, this is a faculty admin issue. This is a parent admin issue. When in fact, what we're realizing by getting out of our over-programmed state is that it's everybody's issue. Every single thing that happens at that school is everybody's issue. Whether you're staff, whether you're a student, whether you're alumni, or whether you're a community member that's just walking by. So to recap, I guess I would love to hear your thought about this, and whether maybe you've seen it, Andy, at all, or you've seen it, Glenn, with some of your discussions. Do we see people kind of trying to transcend the dyad in terms of compromise-based solutions? Or do we actually see real progress with the fact that we are being more inclusive with our compromise-based solutions? If we don't do dyads, if we have multiple points, what we've just done is decentralized winning, right? Or not decentralized, we've decentered winning, because there's not a this versus that. The only winning that can happen is if everybody gets their fingers in there and everybody is okay. It doesn't mean everybody loses, but when we get to this dyad, I'm afraid that we're going to get back to battles, and that's just going to put us right back to where we left off.
Jump in, Andy.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. And I, coming out of this, out of COVID and into, this next school year, I had not thought about that. I actually candidly am looking at that going, boy, I totally agree with Scott on that, and making sure that we don't get back into the weeds, still moving the institution forward and continuing personalization and continuing solution-based solving those issues. But at the same time, though, I hadn't thought about that. But candidly, I'm actually I'm at a loss for words a little bit. I think that's really a good point that I need to think a little bit more, so we don't go backwards. We continue to move forwards and don't get into this you versus me or us versus you mentality.
Well, I mean, what Scott's really talking about, if I may, is we're going to get back into tribalism when we've just spent the last 18 months trying to become human again. And will we be quick to go back to our tribe and then hold those tribes accountable for the things that we've always held them accountable for, when we've learned that that actually didn't work in the first place? But that was the most standardized, at least we thought the most efficient way. But we've now realized that efficiency doesn't necessarily mean speed, which means if we keep thinking that that particular group or this particular group is responsible for this particular problem, it'll just slow progress down. So as always, Scott, great insights, great insights. So I'm going to shift gears here. And, one thing is to me that it has become very evident, Andy, that there is no growth without health. Why do you believe that student well-being is now non-negotiable? What is the current mental state of the high school student, in your opinion?
Oh, it's a great question. It's a domino effect. You have students who feel stressed about academics, athletics, performing arts, and trying to fit in socially. You have parents who are putting expectations on the school and their child. And then you now have those entities, and then you have teachers who feel stressed, especially coming what they teach now, because something can offend somebody, and it's creating this, if you will, this perfect storm of parents, students, and employees who are very, I don't know, I'm saying totally stressed out, but there's definitely a higher level of stress on everybody, whether it's the expectation that they have or not. So that's definitely something that has that perfect storm. But as a result of that, though, I think one of the things that we're trying to do here with our therapists, and also with some of the guest lecturers that we're bringing in, and even some of them we bring in and some we do on Zoom, we're just trying to get parents to understand what are the strengths and weaknesses of your child. How can we help you facilitate those strengths and weaknesses? Because you as parents, you're the primary educators, and you know your kids better than we do. How can we work together so that your son or daughter can become the best version of themselves? As Matthew Kelly talks about, the author Matthew Kelly talks about that. How do we get your kids to become the best version of themselves? And working together here to do that. As a result of that, though, yes, the mental state of high school kids today, they are stressed. And last year, they were stressed out before COVID. Yeah. Our parents were stressed out, and our faculty were as well before COVID, and it added another layer to the intensity.
So tell us about, the stress that these students are feeling outside the classroom. This seems to be an ongoing, an elevated concern.
This device right here has transformed things. Most of the discipline issues that we have revolve around this at some point. And whether it's Instagram, Snapchat, not so much Facebook, those two things, Instagram and Snapchat, quite a bit of stuff comes in on that. But I think that the kids, what they do, it's the same thing that you see sometimes is, these kids portray their life. Some kids portray their life as perfect. So there's a perfect sunset or a perfect image that's up there. And so then when another young man or woman looks at it, one of our kids, they're like, well, they've got a better life than I do. And there's this whole comparison thing that's happening. The other thing that happens too, and I've used this example before, is when we were in high school, and if we didn't get invited to a party on a Friday night, we found out about it, and then by Monday we were probably over it, right? These kids now weren't invited to the party, and then for the next 3 or 4 hours or the next several days, they're going to see pictures of the party, who was there, what they were doing, because it's all on Instagram and Snapchat. So it doesn't just hurt once, it hurts every time that you open it. And so our kids then are dealing with those stresses as well. So the phone, the all-encompassing phone that has so many great ideas and things on it, also has a lot of stressors for our young people as their cerebral cortex is developing. And as we know, that's not fully developed in women till 23 or 24, and in men 26 or 27. So they're going through a lot of things in the decisions that they're making. And then the last thing I would say just on that course is their life is on video from 14 to 25. Our life was not. When we look at our lives, we were not on video, and things that we did that maybe weren't the best decisions that you could have made were not being able to be recapped on video and re-shown to people and things like that. But unfortunately, this generation, this Gen Z, is dealing with that in the high school. Things we've never seen before, and except for the last really 7 to 10 years.
Have you been able to identify, Andy, how these external stressors are impacting performance in the classroom?
Well, it's definitely impacting kids' sleep, because if you'll be on it all hours of the night, somebody will be texting you and things like that. It definitely is a distraction, because it definitely causes some kids, as a result of no sleep and then the distraction, they're not necessarily as focused. But it has increased the stress as well. Just as I'm comparing my life to yours. Your life looks better than my life, and look what I'm seeing.
So Andy, tell us a little bit about what Santa Margarita is doing. I mean, you're clearly getting out in front of these mental health issues, and you recognize the need for health and well-being of the student. Tell us a little bit about the actions that you're taking to prevent this and or to provide assistance.
Well, we took a three-prong approach with it. First of all, we gathered some of the best psychologists and therapists that we could in the local area, and we meet with them quarterly. And we run ideas by them. We showed them the plans for our health and wellness remodel that we're doing this summer, and got their input on that. So we've got this group of experts that we meet with. They meet quarterly. Then we went and we have 3 therapists that are on. One is on campus full time, and very different from counseling. We've now taken our counselors and we have academic counseling where you took Algebra 1 as a freshman, you need to take Algebra 2 as a sophomore, academic. Then we have college counseling, which is, hey, where do you want to go to college? If you want to go to this school, you should, take these classes, which is a little bit different. And then they work with you and strategize on that. And then we now have this mental health component with these therapists, and they are meeting with kids and they're talking to them about the anxiety, the depression, the impact of the stress in their lives, personal issues that they have going on. And what they're doing is, last year in the spring, to give an example, we had 64 kids that were going to see a therapist, not regularly, but had checked in and wanted to talk to one of our therapists on campus. And we were really touched by that. But at the same time, we realized there was definitely a need for it on campus to continue. Mm-hmm. So the goal now with this center that is almost finished, we're putting it with activities and campus ministry. So it's not like you walk down the hallway and go, hi, I'm having a breakdown, I'm going to go see a therapist. You can actually, being in the same area, you can be in there for a lot of reasons, and then maybe slip into a therapist's office and talk to them about, anything that's going on. For more extensive problems, for people that need longer therapy and things like that, more than, a couple sessions, because we're just the triage, we're outsourcing. We've partnered with Chalk Hospital, Children's Hospital of Orange County, and using their resource and their network as well to get these kids validating their feelings, and also dealing with really the main 2 things is our depression and anxiety.
Wow, Andy, thank you for sharing that story. And I mean, I'm going to circle back to something you said earlier. You just said that there were 64 kids that took advantage of this service that you've offered them, which is incredible. But you also said earlier, when talking about the parents, that you said, and tell me if I'm wrong here, you said to the parents, well, you know your kids better than we do. Is that really true? I mean, it seems to me that when you have 64 kids that have said, I'm going to take advantage of this service, do parents really know their kids as well as they think they do these days? I mean, I can remember when we went to school, the answer was yes, but is that still the case?
It's a great question. I would say it varies by individual, by parent, and how involved they really are. Because, sometimes you get the parent that drops their son or daughter off and says, hey, well, pretty much you raise them. But a lot of the parents that decide to send their kids to Santa Margarita, definitely believe that they are the primary educator. Now, Catholic education still says that, but obviously that they're the primary educator. But I would definitely say that there is a component of a faction of our parents now that probably don't know their parents as well as maybe our parents knew us. Funny thing that you bring this up, because I talk about this when I talk at parent things. I always tell them 2 things about, if I could give you any parenting tips when your kids are in high school. Number 1 is, don't be your child's friend, right? They're going to have lots of friends, but they're only going to have one mom and one dad. So you don't want to be their friend. There's plenty of time for that when they get older. And number 2 is take that Ronald Reagan type philosophy, which is trust but verify. Just because they're telling you that they're at place X doesn't mean they necessarily are. So make sure that you trust but verify, and you verify where they are, because these are the years, again, with a not fully developed cerebral cortex, we don't necessarily make the best decisions. But I would definitely say, Glenn, that we there is a trend that some, not all, but some of our parents do not know their kids as well as our parents do us.
Scott, what are you thinking?
That the kids don't know themselves either. And none of us, I don't know myself. And I don't think, Andy and Glenn, you know yourself either. We know where we've been. We have some ideas about where we're going, but I think that, that might be one of the pieces that is going to elude us a little bit as we think about this, right? Because I think going back to the social media, well, I think what we were doing, it's that replacement theory stuff and behavior that you talk about, Glenn. We thought we were doing connection with social media. What generation did that come up with? Like guilty, right? Like we brought the social media out because how were we raised? We were raised to be our authentic self. Find yourself and be yourself. That is heavy because it's bad advice, because we evolve. The person that I am and want to be today is different from the dude that was here a week ago, let alone 5 years ago. And to not have the space to be able to change and to evolve and to maybe admit that a path was a wrong one, but maybe it wasn't wrong at all. But because I have to be my authentic self, it appears to be wrong. And it appears as a failure because with social media, what we did was we confused what we thought was connectivity for distinction. That's what you were talking about, Andy, right? When you're saying, oh, sunset, here's a better one. Better sunset. Oh, here's somebody I met. Look at who I saw at the restaurant, right? Here's me with 20 friends, up 22 friends. We're distinguishing ourselves. We're not connecting with others. We're actually pushing them away. And so when we talk about social media being social, it's probably one of the worst names that could ever be given, right? So my challenge would be, how do we think about this to where we get the same sort of ethos into a new generation that doesn't make the mistake, at least that I make over and over again, which is mistaking what I feel is me connecting to people when in fact it's nothing but distinction. I'm trying to distinguish myself and put others away or even put others down simply because I just want to be a little up.
Scott, real quick, before you jump in, Andy, you made me think of what you said is social media, when you go back to its original roots, were intended to build community. Now it's building competition. That's what I got out of it.
I'm with you. But Glenn, I'm going to say it was built for competition. That's why it works, right? It was never made to build community. That's all illusion. It's illusion of connection by distinguishing myself, because even in my little mini social media community, I got to distinguish myself and be the better one of those. And the better one of those.
So based upon what Dr. Lacey is saying here, Andy, do you think that students may be confusing what community really means?
100%. I would 100% agree with that. And I agree with it. It's really anti-social media. It's funny. That's the way that Dr. Lacey said it. No, it definitely is dividing us. It's not bringing us closer together. Even just simple things like if you go on a family trip and you're on a long drive, right? You have something to entertain you now versus when we were kids. Again, maybe just be bored looking out the window at the pretty sights, right? There isn't that happening anymore. And their brains are going all the time with trying to compare something. So the average adult makes about 35,000 decisions a day in their head, right? And so for kids, it's probably similar, and if not more. And so the issue, I think, I totally agree with it. I don't think social media is bringing us together. It's actually making us more competitive. And ironically, going back to the point where I had the phone in my hand earlier, we actually have found at the school that most of our discipline issues revolve something around what's happening on Instagram and Snapchat and getting sent to us, pictures, videos, etc.
Wow. Okay, well, let's close on this big topic. Andy, it's clear that education and societal issues are indelibly linked. How prepared are educational leaders to confront, address, and get out in front of this? You know where this is going, right? A conversation about DE&I. What are your thoughts? What have you experienced? And what are your maybe some some perspectives that you can share with your peers around?
I think that I don't think we're prepared. And things are changing so fast that it makes it really difficult to be prepared, because the trends and the issues that are coming up in some respects happen overnight. And so I am concerned really with what we put out, because I've never felt like before where what we end up saying is wrong at a level that it's never been wrong before, meaning that it's not what people necessarily want to hear. And, usually you make a decision, normally it's like, probably 70% of the people are going to like that. Right now, with what's going on with everything, that's happening with all the social trends and the social issues that are going on, it's split. And it's, you're getting emails from parents where you did this wrong and you did this wrong. And it's not a 70-30 proposition anymore. It's 50-50. And in many respects, it's probably 40-60, where we're only 40% of the people think that we're even making a decision that, or commenting on something in a manner that they would agree with.
I've always said that institutions weren't designed for the mass variances in people. And it's clear that this is the case in society. I mean, what do you tell the parents who are being challenged by this ethos of diversity, equity, and inclusion, knowing the caveat that they don't even know what it means, but they still maybe don't like it, or maybe it's too uncomfortable for them?
The benefit that we have as a Catholic school is we can go back to our charism. So our charism at here is Caritas Christi, which is the love of Christ. And then expanding on that, Jesus taught us how to treat people through the gospel. If you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you'll see many examples of how Jesus treated people. And then we really try and focus on our four core principles. And, the four core principles are obviously compassion, humility, justice, and goodness for us. And we really try to leave it there, because it's hard to argue with that as a Catholic school, because whether you came here for education or you came here because of the faith, we try and focus on that at our school. But as a result of that, though, that also upsets another crowd and upsets people in a different way. But I do think that that's what we really try to come back to, is the love of Christ, and showing that to everyone, regardless of race, gender, anything.
Scott, what are you thinking?
Just as soon as you're saying that, Andy, I'm thinking of the objections, or the upset is literally the objections you were talking about earlier. It's just a negatively expressed, hey, me too, I'm here, and I'm not with that, right? And suddenly we're back to the perhaps dyad to tendency, but we don't have to be. I'm going to just close with my part. I just love talking with you, Andy, and Glenn. It's always a riot to have a good time with a new friend, I tell you what. But I think my final comment goes back to your mass variance thought, and connecting that to, again, what we're doing in education. And ultimately, if we do education as a destination, if we're selling a destination, come here and find yourself, find your academic self, find your intellectual self, find your professional self. We're selling a bag of goods. It's not true, right? If we can sell more about the emergent self, we're helping you discover how to emerge, how to evolve, how to grow, how to be a different person every year, but not necessarily have that be a bad thing. I think that's a lot more realistic in terms of the messages that we're giving students. Like when we tell students that they have all this pressure to figure out themselves amidst all of this going on, when they know deep down and they look, this is nothing but mass variance, but we're saying find your place in it. Maybe they have a lot of places in that mass variance, and maybe today they're here, but they need to have space to go there tomorrow. And so ultimately, I think where we're at is back to humanity first. Whether it's a 10-kid lunch where we're just sitting down and having a sandwich with a couple kids, or whether it's a staff meeting, or whether it's a walk around the community, I think when we see people and we're talking with people, we have to do what Glenn often talks about, and that is, even if it's to ourselves, I see you and I hear you, but that's not good enough. How am I seeing you and how am I hearing you? We're still going back to, I see you, student, and I hear you, student. What does it feel like to be a student? I think if we start taking off those roles when we do that connection, what we're going to do is we're going to realize education is a lot more about teaching people how to connect and how to grow and evolve than it is about finding authenticity.
Well said. Well said. Well, I think one of the really most powerful things that Dr. Lacey said today was, I'm 48 years old. I'm still finding myself. I think finding yourself is a lifelong a process. And candidly, if you ask people, many of them on their deathbed, they probably didn't find themselves even, right minutes before they're passing away. So I like that thought. I think that's really powerful. I also think, too, is taking off some of the labels. One of the things that Dr. Lacey said that is a good challenge is maybe bringing in 5 faculty members and 5 students and bringing them in together and just saying, hey, we're just people. What do you think of this place? I like, so my mind's going as Dr. Lacey has brought up some of these points very, very succinctly. Thank you.
Brother Andy, and maybe don't even start with what do you think about this place? Like, what do you think about that tree? Like get them out of the situation. Remind them that they're humans, and that tree is more important to them, right? Than this lunch even. But anyway, just some advice from a guy that probably should be listening to myself more than telling.
No, good stuff. I like it. Thank you.
Well, look, guys, I appreciate your time as always, Scott and Andy. Tremendous. This is the kind of discussion and discourse that is often overlooked because everyone's trying to find their comfort at a time of tremendous discomfort. And I'm a believer now that, and I've always been that, I will tell you that just even recently I learned about myself, and that's another story for another day. But what I have learned is that if we're not seeking discomfort, we are doing we're not being contributors to humanity. We're not being contributors to the future. We need to be seeking it. We need to know what that feels like, because the truth is we got a long road ahead of us. And it's leaders like you that are going to make people more aware of what it really means to be a leader, what we should be as parents, and what our ultimate role is as a student, which is not what it says in the dictionary. We are lifelong learners, and we're all teachers and students. And if we maybe take an approach that's fueled with more humility and vulnerability, maybe we'll find that in the end, all of this hierarchy meant nothing to begin with. So Andy, thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Scott. And as we always close the show, when you lead in the age of personalization, you will see things that others don't. Do what others won't, and keep pushing when prudence says quit. Thank you, Andy. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks, dude.
Thanks for listening to Personalization Outbreak. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss a show. If you enjoyed the content, visit ageofpersonalization.com to check out our free streaming video series and learn how to get involved in the movement. I'm Glenn Yopes. I wish you a good day, and remember, without strategy, change is merely substitution, not evolution.